What up, friendos? Welcome back. Sam Bankman-Fried, he's been jailed ahead of his trial. If you've been following along, this is a very interesting turn of events and something that should have happened in the first place. I think the judge would probably agree at this point. So basically, Sam Bankman-Fried, if you don't know, CEO of FTX, Alameda Research, basically took billions of dollars, tens of billions of dollars of people's money, said that the two companies had nothing to do with each other. There was no commingling of funds because obviously why would there be? People was giving him cryptocurrency and he was, his website FTX was essentially just going to be holding their cryptocurrency, and that's what people expected. But what he was actually doing was using the money people gave him from FTX and making investments, paying politicians, paying for debt and things like this from Alameda. So he was commingling funds, which is fraud. He was defrauding the people that were putting money into FTX. And obviously what happens when you rob Peter to pay Paul? Well, it's a Ponzi scheme, isn't it? Basically, every penny you spend is money that is somebody else's, which you would need to pay back. And then if everyone tried to withdraw their money, you don't have all their money because you've been spending it. So essentially what happens is you are operating a fraud at that stage. So when it all came crashing down, it all came out. He was arrested and he'd been charged with like 7 different counts essentially related to fraud, money laundering, conspiracy, and a bunch of others. He was extradited from the Bahamas. Under the extradition agreement, they said that they would charge him for these like 7 things. And then when he got brought to the US slapped on another charge for basically giving money to politicians in an illegal fashion. This charge got removed. People started going with the conspiracy route of because of his heritage. I don't need to say anymore that he was being let off. Some other people were saying because he gave money to the Democrats, he was being let off and he would go free. Obviously, none of these things are true. It's just a case that if the US signs an extradition agreement with the Bahamas and says we will only explicitly charge you with these things and then charges you with new things, you're directly going against the extradition agreement, which is obviously your goodwill with a foreign government. So obviously that just looks bad on the US. The Bahamas talked about it and the US eventually dropped that charge. Doesn't mean he's going free. One charge of many. So what's happened now is he's been witness tampering. At least according to the judge, he's been witness tampering, and basically he had a gag order implemented from the judge saying you can't talk about the case. And obviously if the DOJ, Department of Justice, is bringing a case against you, you should also not be contacting people involved, especially people that may be witnesses, which is things he's been doing. So I'll just read you the article because it gives you the facts better than I probably can off the top of my head. So he was sent to jail ahead of his October trial on multiple financial crime charges after a federal judge revoked his release on bond Friday afternoon, saying the former crypto heavyweight appears to have tried to tamper with witnesses. So how did he try to tamper with witnesses? According to the judge, he says to risk crossing the line in an effort to get right up to the line wherever it is. All things considered, I'm going to revoke bail. He added, my conclusion is there is probable cause to believe the defendant has attempted to tamper with witnesses at least twice. There is a rebuttal presumption that there is no set of conditions that will ensure Bankman-Fried will not be a danger. A danger in what context? In the context of a danger to the judicial process and obviously the evidence and what he could essentially get in front of or convince people not to talk about. So his mum and dad were at the thing, Barbara Fried and Joseph Bankman. Probably weren't very happy about this, of course. So according to the DOJ, Bankman-Fried's reaching out to former FTX US General Counsel Ryan Miller and using a virtual private network to, in words of his defense team, watch the Super Bowl were enough to require a modification of his bail conditions. The last straw, however, was Bankman-Fried sharing part of former Alameda Research CEO Carolyn Ellison's private diary with the New York Times. So he was leaking information to journalists, basically, to try and colour the case, right? Which you're obviously not allowed to do. He's got a gag order about talking about the case whatsoever. So leaking documents to the press to try and get whatever goodwill or whatever it's going to be in the public eye and to colour people's impressions of other people involved. You're not allowed to do that. Go straight to jail, which of course has happened. And the fact that he was using a VPN to do something as harmless, according to his defense team, as watching the Super Bowl, People know why people would use a VPN, right? And the judge said it while the use of a VPN in and of itself may not be overly significant, it speaks to Bankman-Fried's mindset, he said. Obviously, he'd watched one too many YouTubers with a NordVPN ad because he was trying to keep his ongoings private, wasn't he? I wonder if he got up to 80% off of his first month or something. Bankman-Fried's defense team admitted he shared some diary pages with the Times, though his attorneys disputed that he was trying to tamper with a witness. Here, we have a very thin record with a lot of spin, his lawyer told the judge. The defense team also argued that jailing Bankman-Fried would make it more difficult to prepare for his trial. You probably should have argued that to him before he started tampering with witnesses and leaking documents to the press, because then you wouldn't have been in front of the judge. Because obviously the way that this goes is it's very normal. It's a white-collar crime. They don't think he's going to flee anywhere because how high profile he is and things like that. So basically they let him out on bond. He pays a bunch of money and they say, go and be free, because obviously you've not been convicted of anything yet. There's been no guilty charges. Therefore, you are technically innocent until proven guilty. So go and live your life. If he was like a mobster or something, if he was somebody who could intimidate witnesses or pay people to go and attack people or do some crazy shit, then he wouldn't have got bond because it would have been more likely for him to impact the case. But the whole reason he was free is because they didn't fear that he was going to do things like that, and obviously because he had an agreement that he wouldn't do. So to get to the stage where you're back in front of a judge and they're saying, actually, you did do those things and we're going to pull that, is entirely your fault. And I imagine this is not going to play well in court when the case actually does fully go to court in October, because, I mean, why would you be trying to tamper witnesses and do things like this if you had nothing to hide, right? If you were completely innocent, as you say. So good for the judge here. He essentially just swatted all this down. Judge Kaplan wasn't convinced by these arguments. Quote, I don't think that the revocation is quite the insurmountable problem, essentially saying you can prepare for the case, not a problem, so do that with him in jail. During the hearing, Assistant U.S. Attorney Danielle Sassoon argued that detaining Bankman-Fried was further warranted by the fact that he was increasingly visiting New York for pre-trial conferences and trial preparations, and she said he's effectively unsupervised while he's here, which again just points out the fact that if he's doing this, and we already know about it, if he's here and doing other things while unsupervised, what else could he be getting up to? So the DOJ also had alternative options in case the judge rejected detaining Bankman-Fried outright. They would have also been okay with home incarceration, banning all visitors, and blocking all internet access except for 2 databases needed to prepare for trial. So if you don't go to jail, we're okay if you're just basically isolated from the rest of the world, no access to information, and nobody can come and see you. This would have included blocking Google Drive, Sassoon said, noting that Ellison's diary was part of the Drive files Bankman-Fried had access to. Mark Cohen, Bankman-Fried's attorney, tried arguing that there was insufficient legal basis to jail him ahead of trial and that the standards set by precedent cases had not been met. Quote, the only reason we know about Bankman-Fried meeting with a Times reporter is because he was complying with his bail conditions, Cohen said. So the only reason we know that he was doing stuff he wasn't allowed to do was because he reported doing stuff he wasn't allowed to do. Good boy, I guess. Also doesn't change the fact he was doing things he isn't allowed to do. Sassoon, the prosecutor, disagreed. Quote, I think the fact the defendant was more subtle in his methods than a mobster doesn't mean it was benign, she said. Yeah, I mean, it's hard to disagree with that one. So Bankman-Fried is currently set to go on trial at the start of October. My washing's done. On wire fraud, commodities fraud, securities fraud, money laundering, and related conspiracy charges. He faces another trial tentatively scheduled for next March on additional charges brought by the DOJ after Bankman-Fried's arrest and extradition. Bankman-Fried's lawyers said they would appeal the decision and motioned to stay the revocation of the bail until that appeal was heard. The judge rejected the stay. Go straight to jail. Stay there. So then, of course, they clarify here is the article, Bankman-Fried going to jail ahead of the trial does not mean he will go to prison after it. He would need to be found guilty of at least one of the charges laid against him and sentenced to prison after, which is obvious. He's in jail because he's essentially tampering with the case and making it harder to prove the case against him. He wouldn't be in jail if that wasn't the case because it's a white-collar crime and they wasn't scared of him vanishing or doing this, and then obviously he's fucked up on that one. They still have to prove that he's guilty beyond a reasonable doubt for him to go to prison, Personally, I don't think that they won't be able to do this. Of course, there are still going to be theories that, they're going to let him off because he gave money to the Dems and all this type of nonsense. But I think it's pretty clear cut here. There's nothing crazy going on. There's no conspiracies we need to be reading into or anything. The guy's in jail now, and that's where he should remain. So there we go. Bankman-Fried, he's where he should be, and we'll continue to follow up and see how it goes. Check my links in the video description: Patreon, Twitch, Twitter, Discord, and I'll see you next time. Peace.